Welcome everyone to our webinar on helping a distributed workforce in a downturn, how this affects compensation and hiring. It's been a wild year for compensation and hiring, especially in tech. And as we look ahead to 2023, our hiring and compensation strategies have never been more important. A year ago, it was a candidate-driven market, but with a looming economic downturn and the announcement of layoffs in the last few months, what has shifted? And what should growth-focused companies focus on to attract and retain top talent? How does a globally distributed workforce affect compensation and hiring strategies when we're talking about a downturn? My name is Candice Giesbrecht. I'm the Director of Talent Strategies at Teamit.com. Teamit's the leader in modern talent strategy, helping growth-focused companies recruit high-performing technical teams. I am joined today by our esteemed panel, Annika Reinhardt, co-founder of Talent Collective. She's a certified compensation, global remuneration, and sales compensation professional. And she's here to provide her insights on the latest compensation trends and the strategies that companies can implement in order to remain competitive. And of course, we have Teamit's president and co-founder, Alistair Shepherd-Cross, who has his fingers on the pulse and also on the longevity of the curves in tech. He's going to bring perspectives on what is happening in the market and how salaries are impacting talent acquisition in the tech industry. Welcome, Annika and Alistair.
Hello, hello.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Hello. We would love to hear from anybody who'd love to share about where you're calling in from. Please put it into the chat. And just love to, hear who's kind of in the room. And of course, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And at the end of the session, we want to leave some time for Alistair and Annika to respond to those questions. And if you feel like I really want to verbally say my question, then please just let us know in the chat, and we can call you up. So I actually see that there's a hand raised from Jeff Waldman. Jeff, welcome. Is there something you want to say just as we kick off?
I think the chat is disabled.
Chat is disabled. Good to know. Okay.
Yep.
Ange, I'm hoping that Ange in the background will see how to fix this. So my apologies, and thank you for letting us know. So it does look like the raising a hand does work. So let's go with that strategy. And thanks, Jeff, for going first and for letting us know. So without further ado, Annika and Alistair, with all the stuff that's in the news regarding the economy, recession, historic inflation, the jobless rate is still, in the midst of all of that, historically low. And so how do we make sense of this? And in fact, I saw this one stat that said that it's the jobless rate is actually the lowest that has been since the early 80s. And so there's this phrase called a job full recession. What should HR professionals be paying attention to right now, especially with regard to staffing and compensation?
I'm happy to jump in. It's so fun. I love how the media always comes up with like the latest and greatest taglines. So right now it is the job full recession, but a very interesting one. And I think one of the big pieces, in my opinion, that HR professionals can really turn their focus on is actually career development and career progression. Might seem a little odd in a market where we have seen, quite a few layoffs, especially in tech. But let's think about this for a bit. Our employees are our greatest asset, right? Particularly in a downturn, having engaged employees is really what can make or break a company, and having disengaged employees can really, be very disadvantageous. So While it might be tempting to believe that with comp in particular, we can magically make employee engagement appear, we all know that is actually not really true. However, what we have seen is a very, very strong correlation between employee engagement and the fact that companies that are engaging their employees in career development opportunities are seeing higher employee engagement numbers. So World at Work, which is kind of the association for us comp professionals, did a study not too long ago on that particular fact. And basically what they saw is 62% of employees felt very engaged, therefore higher productivity, more, focused on the company, supporting them through these difficult times, if the employer was focused on their career progression and their career development. Whereas those companies that weren't focusing on that, we only saw 5% of employees being engaged. So if engagement is driven by employers focusing on their individuals and their talent and managing that talent and developing that talent, we do see a higher impact. And so I would encourage HR folks, again, even if that might seem a little odd, to really focus on those folks that are in your organization. Make sure there's job clarity, make sure that folks understand how they can progress within their jobs and what other opportunities there might be. Now, that might not be a traditional ladder climbing model, but rather a jungle gym. How can we kind of move folks from roles to roles, especially if maybe hiring is not a big thing. But again, it's like I would put that as one of the number one things to look out for in 2023. Alistair, what's your thought?
Yeah, well, this is just a really interesting time. Every recession has its own unique components. And this is the very first one that we've been through with a fully distributed global workforce. So, no one has a crystal ball as to exactly how that's going to pan out and what that actually means. But, our best guess right from the start was people have way more choice than they've ever had. And what's going on locally, even nationally, is less impactful than it ever used to be in a recessionary kind of environment, because they can apply for jobs all over the world and all over North America or wherever it might be. So, I think we're seeing that play out. There just is so much more opportunity for people. So, people get sucked up very quickly if there are layoffs. And, I think a full employment recession, I think, is sort of the reality. So I wish, I had better news for people looking to hire talent to say, hey, the market is soft and you can find great people all over the place. It's just not the reality. Plus, on the back of the fact that the market has been grossly undersubscribed, I think there were double the number of jobs open versus the number of people to fill them. That was at the beginning of this year, and so that gap has not closed significantly. I mean, it is better than it was because it was, probably the tightest job market we've ever seen in tech. And so I think people are feeling some relief that they are able to find people that were previously out of reach. But the reality is that you still have to have really great hiring strategies. You've got to have multiple different components to your hiring strategies. You've got to be competitive. You've got to have a good story to tell. And as Annika was saying, you've got to, career development. You've got to help retain your folks as well. It's one thing finding people, you still got to make sure you retain them. So I think just the reality is the tech market is incredibly tight, and there's probably no end in sight to that, unfortunately. So good companies can still excel and still attract talent, and now is probably a better time than ever to do that, certainly over the last few years, but it's still a challenge.
Yeah. So Alistair, you referenced sort of the way things were a year ago, and maybe things are a little bit better. I wonder if you could speak to that. And so I'm thinking specifically about, some of the trends that we saw a year ago when we did a similar webinar, or last year when we were talking about candidates having multiple offers in their inboxes, and being pinged by recruiters multiple times a week, and also just the number of rejected offers that were happening. So where are we at compared to a year ago on metrics like that? And I realize that, you know, I'm not looking for hard data, but just what are the trends that you're seeing?
Well, you know, instead of being contacted 6 times a week by a recruiter, they're being contacted 3 times a week. Or instead of having 6 job offers, they might have 2 or 3. So there's definitely a drop off, but you know, it's still an issue at the end of the day. And I mean, there's just so much opportunity out there for a relatively small set of skill set. And obviously specific jobs are harder to fill than others. I mean, there's obviously there's always roles that are more in demand than others. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing that continue. So, you know, how many jobs can a candidate really run at any one time anyway? And so, you know, 6 jobs is, you know, takes up their whole day almost. So
that's a job in itself.
That's a job in itself. So, you know, I'm hearing that there's certainly less activity, but there's still a huge amount of there's still lots of options. I mean, the other part to this is if you want to talk Canada-wide, it's a challenge up here because first of all, the exchange rate with the US dollar is not in our favor. So, you know, a lot of American companies are still hiring talent remotely in Canada, and they can afford to pay them, you know, more than what Canadian companies can afford. And part of that is the exchange rate. So plus, you know, salaries are higher anyway, you know, in some of the bigger markets like San Francisco and New York. So it does put Canadian companies at a disadvantage. I mean, it's great for the candidate, but it's a challenge for companies up here. And we're seeing more and more companies from the US, you know, double down on Canadian talent and set up Canadian offices and entities so they can actually build teams up here.
Mm-hmm. Annika, anything you want to add in terms of what you're seeing?
Well, I guess, you know, if we're looking at the compensation element of this, you know, one might think that, well, wait a minute, if there was more talent perceived more talent in the market, maybe companies will get deals. No such thing. So I don't, you know, if anything, it's like you might now get access to talent that you didn't have access before because maybe they wouldn't have considered your organization. So you might get, you know, again, the type of talent that you may be able to attract is different. But if companies are now starting to think, it's like, oh, well, wait a minute, we have, you know, so many potential people that are applying, you will see their salary demands will not have changed, even if they're now competing with more folks. And again, it's like, I'd love to hear from our audience if this is what they're seeing. If anything, we might see kind of the challenging times level out a little bit in the sense of like, you know, things were going a little nutty. And so if anything, it might kind of, you know, level out a bit, but not increase as much as we've seen it increase. But I don't think there will be deals that are to be had when it comes to talent.
I'm sure you're seeing this, Annika, too, but I think salaries are stabilizing.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, but it's still, you know, coming from a point where the market, you know, saw such rapid growth over the last 18 months that it's still kind of a tough pill to swallow sometimes for clients to have to deal with. And then, you know, that US Canadian component that I mentioned, you know, we're still seeing really big salaries coming out of the US for Canadian talent, which again is hard to compete with. So so there are, you know, ongoing pressures there for sure. But I think the silly season has finally kind of left us. So now we're just in a inflated
the silly season.
The silly season, I like that.
Yeah, sounds like a blog post to me. That'll be the topic of our next webinar.
And, you know, and we've even seen candidates that we've worked with for years, and this is more senior folks who recognize, because they've been through the ups and downs of the job market over the years, so they know when they're in the silly season because they've probably been in one before. Maybe it was back in the tech bubble of back in 2000, but you know, they recognized that they were paid a ridiculous amount of money, not sustainable. And then when they got laid off, they said, look, I recognize I'm not going to get that again, and that's okay. So I think for more senior folks, they kind of have a bit of a pragmatic outlook on that. Sometimes I think some of the more junior intermediates perhaps think they're actually worth that, and that because they haven't been through it before. And so sometimes there's a bit of an education as markets soften to actually kind of say, hey, you know what, maybe you were caught up in the silly season, as I like to call it.
Yeah, we have a follow-up question that was sent to us from the audience. Just, on that, have you seen any interesting or new trends or perks that companies are offering outside of salary that has helped to make offers attractive? What are the things that people are doing right, and what's mattering to candidates?
Yeah, I wish I would have oh my God, this is the hottest new thing, you should do this. I don't think there has been, much change in what we've seen over the last year. However, and, I'm sure, again, all of you have heard this many, many times, is to me, there's two things that are really impacting employees right now and kind of how they're seeing things. It's number one is flexibility. It doesn't matter if that is remote versus non-remote, if it is, your benefits being more customized, if it is Shopify just, kind of changed their pay philosophy, saying it's like, you want more base or more stock options, right? And it's like, obviously it's a publicly traded company, but this notion of customizing, I think I've been talking about for years. I feel we're getting closer and closer to companies really having to look at this much more, especially with the diverse workforce we have. Now, with that come challenges, right? From an administrative perspective, from an equitable internal equity perspective. So there's challenges there, but we've seen, like in the US, there's a really cool company I've been following for a long time that does a lot of this work in the stipend world. They're called Compt.io. And again, they've been working on this for years now to bring more flexibility, to say is like, oh, you want a little bit more of this and a little bit more of that? No problem, right? You can kind of trade it out so that it's easier to manage. And again, flexibility on the work side, right? Be it your 4 days, no meeting Fridays, 9 to 5, or this 9 to 5 doesn't exist. It's like now 10 till 2 core hours, and the rest is, you decide on how you want to do it. So I think the flexibility will come in many ways, shapes, and forms. It's really meeting employees where you are and where they are, and realizing the one fits all model might not always work. And again, I say this and knowing how challenging that is to implement, because I do implement these things, but it's trying to figure out what else can we do to be more flexible with our employees. So I think the flexibility will be a big thing, and is maybe it's not a trend, but it's kind of it's this customization around that we'll see more of.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, Annika, and I think it's so important, especially for companies who have limits in what they can offer in terms of especially place flexibility. So, there are roles that cannot be done remotely, or there are roles that, or there may be companies where executives, just for sometimes good reasons, really are saying we want people co-located, and we're willing to be a bit flexible over here, or maybe more flexible over there, but flexibility, there's such an opportunity for creativity of companies. It doesn't just have to be about place of work. And so you riffed on a few, in terms of no meeting Fridays, or flexibility potentially in terms of your benefits maybe, or what are some other examples that you've seen of where companies have been able to offer flexibility aside from remote versus on-site?
Yeah, no, Alice, it's like, if you I'd be interested to hear what your companies that you're dealing with, what they're offering in terms of flexibility, if it's outside just the workplace situation.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, most of it is just around that workplace flexibility. Like, where do you work, how many hours a day, having that freedom. And actually, we are, this has been a big social experiment, this whole COVID work from home thing. And, we're still trying to figure out as a society, what works best. And I guess it's different for everybody. Every company has a different structure set up differently. But I think more people are going back to the office and seeing benefits from it. And whether it's 1 day a week, and I know we brought that in, and I think we've enjoyed it as an organization. We are also seeing that companies are, they have a distributed team, but they don't want to sort of give up the distributed workforce that they have access to now, and maybe that they've inherited just through COVID. But they do want to try and build pods in specific geographic locations, rather than just having the scatterbomb approach of hiring anyone anywhere, which a lot of companies did back in COVID, because it just simply didn't matter where people were based. You could have someone in Thunder Bay, someone in Nunavut, a couple of people in Calgary. Well, now people are going, well, it's hard to manage, and we do value being in the office or having some physical interaction. So we'd like to build, but we don't want to give up this distributed workforce. So we want to focus on, let's say, Calgary, Edmonton, and I don't know, Vancouver, for example, and build a pod of talent in that particular area. So that just adds more ability to manage a team and get teams together and help kind of bring in some, in-office practices and just more human interaction with their teams. So we're definitely seeing that. And I think most people have flexibility around that. We don't meet that many people who say, I absolutely won't go into the office. I mean, there are a few, but most are open to going back at some point.
I just saw somebody, I think Susan posted something around accommodating diversity in the workforce, and I think that's really interesting. Thank you, Susan, for that note. I have seen some cool stuff. Actually, I'm working with a company right now who they're pushing for much more flexibility around holidays. Right. So basically having, as you're starting, you decide what your holidays are that are important to you, and basically setting that up as part of, like, everybody gets the 11 stats or 10 stats, whatever it may be, but it doesn't have to be your typical Easter, Christmas, and Thanksgiving. And again, it's kind of like baking that in. Interesting enough, it's like that just this year definitely has, like, I've seen this multiple times. There's a really, and it's like, I'll send it, and maybe that's something, Candice, you can send out afterwards. I was just looking for it, so if you saw me look it over, I was looking to find my resource. There's a really cool company in Vancouver, Indigenous company, that basically has a template for this that you all can download, and they have their policy online.
Awesome.
And they're in tech as well, and so you can kind of see how they do it and how they set up their policy. But yeah, interestingly enough, definitely something I have seen more of is this flexibility around diversity. So I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes more of something that companies can do, because it seems a little bit easier to manage. However, again, also from an admin perspective, right? Being mindful what kind of impacts that might have on HR, on managers, and how you visualize that for those folks who are impacted, so that they know that there's proper team coverage, so that's not like everybody is off all the time, is important as you're moving forward with some of these types of flexibility strategies.
Yeah. Great insights. And speaking of diversity, I know when we were on our prep call, which was a blast, I kept thinking we should just hit record and just sit, because when we came across some great topics. There's a lot of conversation about different generations in the workplace, and so Gen Z on the one hand is dominating a lot of headlines, I would say, and conversations. And then on the other hand, we have, maybe people who are caring for aging family members. I just saw a great post on LinkedIn this morning where a person was just like, we've spent a lot of time looking at parental policies for people who are in family building phases, was what this person said. But there's so many other caregiving responsibilities that have as much of an impact in many situations, and especially, you know, many of us know people or were the people who moved family members in when you know the care facility wasn't right anymore, and you know there's lots of this these kind of things. So Gen Z, caregiving, multiple generations in the workplace. What do we do? Tell us HR people.
Right, man, I wish I would know. You know, I'm no generational expert here. However, it has been interesting just kind of, you know, looking at just in particular Gen Z, kind of, you know, looking at their pathway. And, you know, they were about what, 10 in 2008, and when, you know, they took their first jobs in the last couple of years, it's been turmoil, right? First the pandemic, now here we are hitting potential recession. So it is very interesting to see kind of where that potential younger generation is fitting in. And one of the things, again, that, you know, when I chat with my clients, and I think Alistair mentioned that earlier as well, is yes, there is this focus on we want to, you know, work for mission-driven organizations, very much millennial kind of, right? That is not gone away, but there's also a big focus on I got to make the money, right? Because of the environments I've been in. So we might see these younger, like often entry-level roles maybe coming in with salary expectations where we're like, whoa. But I think there is potentially that notion that is a little bit more focused on, you know, show me that my salary is fair, that it's competitive, show me that, you know, you can support me when things go downhill, because look, world, this is what's happened during my entire work career, right?
Yeah.
And so interesting, I was you know, reading a study that Microsoft did not too long ago, and they were saying it's like, well, you know, 70% of the folks that they interviewed that were Gen Z or identified as Gen Z, they said something to the fact is like, well, if my employer can't show me the money, I need to find time flexibility in my workplace so that I can find the money elsewhere. Moonlighting, taking, you know, little other gigs, launching their own businesses, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, that is fascinating to me, right? To kind of see that, where it's like, well, we always think the work flexibility is for more work-life balance, which it also likely is, but it's like maybe there is something there around, I want to make sure that I can save for the future. So I thought that was quite fascinating, and kind of how can we, right, again, it's like, how can we accommodate for that? And again, Alistair would love to, and also again, would love to hear from our audience to see what they are seeing.
What's also interesting when, you know, you have come in with a salary now, companies are going through a recession. So maybe, you know, it's harder to access capital. It's harder from the VC market. It's harder, you know, perhaps, you know, revenue's down, yet the employees are still demanding, you know, high salaries plus cost of living, which is a huge impact. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think that can drive some interesting behavior potentially, because people have to, you know, make ends meet, and it's difficult right now. So, you know, maybe there is an opportunity to do moonlighting, and then we've certainly seen that happen. I mean, with people working remotely, you know, over the last few years, people have found out that someone's actually got 2 jobs on the side that they didn't know about. But maybe this can be a more of a formal conversation to say, you know what, we have an open policy about that. As long as it doesn't impact your day-to-day job, then we're okay with that. But I don't know. I mean, it's just interesting conversations. But
well, and it is something like like just thinking from an HR perspective, you know, like maybe proactively having some of those conversations with hiring managers, you know, and executives to say, like, okay, you know, if we have candidates who want to have side hustles, you know, or have consulting practices on the side, or, you know, whatever, how can we allow for that, especially, or where might we allow for that? What are the risks? What are the benefits? You know, and so on.
Well, also having, just not ignoring it and say, well, we just don't do that, but actually having rules of engagement so people are clear about what they can do, what they can't do. You can't work with competition. You can't do things that are, you know, that are going to be sensitive, and you need to be open about it too. So I think just having that dialogue's okay, because if you don't have these conversations, this stuff goes underground anyway, and it happens without you actually knowing about it. So getting ahead of it is not a bad idea. And just going back to sort of the Gen Z and sort of the younger generation, sort of more junior, sort of entry level resources. One thing I just want to bring this up in case we missed it. One thing we are seeing our clients talk about a lot is having younger members of the team come into the office for training and mentoring and getting more of that kind of exposure, just because the benefits are really significant, versus maybe more experienced folks, it's okay for them to work remotely. And, I think we see pushback sometimes from the younger generations saying that, well, that's not fair, we're being treated differently. But actually, the benefits down the road are actually significant, and it helps them get up to speed more effectively, more quickly, and ultimately that can help them make more money and progress through the organization more quickly. So we are seeing, a tiering when it comes to in office and who's got to come in and who doesn't. And yeah, I think it's just interesting that people that have never, because some individuals have never worked in the office before. They come straight out of university and their first job was during COVID. They've never had an office experience, so they don't know potentially what they're missing. And so having these not being afraid to have these hard conversations with individuals to say, look, we do have years of experience around us, and we're here to help you. At the end of the day, don't always look upon this as being treated differently, and that's not fair. So I think, it's just it's just interesting having to sort of have these conversations these days.
Well, and this part of our conversation in our prep call, I'm super glad you brought this up, Alistair, because it started to get a little heated, like as we were talking about. And so, Annika, I want to hear from you. But I mean, I remember that some of the points that we were talking about is that the issue you're talking about, Alistair, of the need for some younger employees or employees who are newer to working, maybe newer in their career. There's this need for mentorship, and there's this need for for those even organic opportunities to be exposed to other leadership styles, or to be exposed to different communication styles, or different ways of working, or different ways of doing these kind of things. And certainly companies can replace those, but they have to be very skilled and very intentional in their mentorship. And also, it really, to me, speaks to the case for just better sync and async practices, because we're wasting our precious sync time with tasks that could be taken offline when we should be using that sync time for that mentorship, for even doing a retro on the thing we just completed, and making sure we're doing a really good job of talking about, so how's it going? What did we learn? What feedback can we give each other? And finding those opportunities and creating those opportunities for feedback. Annika, I saw you wanted to jump in a couple times there.
But again, it's I think it goes back to what I said earlier around why I feel HR and people professionals should really focus on that career people development side, right? That's where I think you're going to make a difference, right? And when I say career development, again, it's not just oh, we got to find all these new, but no, it is, like you said, that giving feedback, that the people development component, right? The ensuring that we're all on the same page, the giving feedback, the collaboration, that all feeds into your career at the end of the day, because we're developing the person, and I think that's, again, it's that's going to make a big difference as we're moving forward.
I think setting expectations too, all those sort of things are really critical. I just think when you come out of a white hot market like this, where I've never seen a market, I've been in the game, in this business for 25 years, I've never seen a market where it was so geared towards the candidate. They held all the power, and just because of the way the market was. But it's very easy to sort of not have the hard conversations or be bold and say, well, this is what we're doing. I mean, you need to listen to people, and you need to give people a place to share their views and what have you. But at the end of the day, you also do have to do what's best for the business. And so I think as the market softens a little bit, I think it's people should, and the market becomes more, I think we're clearer the direction we're going in. We're not in the stop-start COVID world anymore, which is a huge relief, where people can actually start building strategies and following through on them. But I think it's important to be bold and to hold the line at times with what you view as important. The years of experience that you bring to the table, it has real value. Using the more junior intermediate resources and sort of saying, no, we want you to come in to get mentorship, because that's going to benefit you and help you scale up much more quickly, which is a positive.
Yeah. I have I think one more question before I just ask you for last words, because we do want to make sure that we have time for Q&A. Metrics. What metrics matter for 2023, in your opinion?
Well, I can speak to comp metrics.
Yeah, please.
So, and I don't think there's anything like magically here that, if you as an HR professional have looked at this before, it'll still, be relevant. I think from a comp perspective is like, I think this past year has become very clear. It's like, you've got to have a strategy, right? To Alistair's point, is like, if you don't have a strategy, folks will just push, and you have nothing to hold up and say, well, no, this is how we do it at our company. Right?
Yeah.
Very challenging for managers, because they don't know when to say no or when to say yes, because there is no guidelines and no be it comp philosophy or strategy. So, those basics need to be there. So once that is in place, I think kind of the two biggest metrics that we always look at are our compa ratios, which is like your compensation ratios, meaning how is somebody's compensation actually measuring up to the market as defined by you, your organization, your pay policy. So the market is generally our midpoint in a salary range, and that might be, if you want to be competitive, you might position yourself at P75 or P90. If you want to pay fairly, you want to position yourself as P50. So at the 50th percentile. So again, kind of looking at where's the employee at versus your midpoint, so that you can kind of get a sense of how many folks are under what we consider market and what we would want to pay for somebody fully proficient, because that's what being at market means, and how many folks are over. So that's one ratio for sure. The one that I prefer folks are measuring, because it also helps us with identifying when are folks ready for potentially that next step, is range penetration. So looking at, well, how far has Annika walked through her pay range, right? It's like, how deep is her salary in our pay range, and that you can make some decisions from a leadership perspective to say, you know what, once folks are kind of at that 70 to 75% range penetration of their salary range in their job, we better figure out what to do with them next, right? Not saying they all need to get promoted tomorrow, but what we're saying is like, there is not much left for us to kind of push them into the pain range. So do we need to, again, it's like, what are the career development plans? What's the focus? What skills do they need to develop? Is there a role above, or do we have to push them, further in because there's nothing else we have? Are there other roles that they want to take? So those two things, again, is like compa ratio. It's generally something that, all comp professionals will tell you is like, you should always have it. I prefer to look at range penetration, because again, it's like you can make some better decisions around when should we be having conversations for further development. So those are the two comp pieces that, again, won't go away. It might not be a surprise, but Alistair, what are you seeing for your recruitment initiatives? What are things?
Well, the metric that I like to look at is retention. And that is the biggest one for me, because it sums up so many things that are good or bad in the organization, depending on what your retention is like. I think in this market that we've been in, we just see on everyone's resume, they just jumped, every 6 months, 12 months, there's just been, a lot of hoppiness to people. And that's partly driven by, salaries that companies just can't, possibly compete with. And they just have to raise their hands and go, yeah, go for it. I wish you all the best. But, I think when the market softens like it is now, and, I think you could say we're in a recession, even though it's full employment recession, people want to stay with organizations that they trust. They want to, I think people are looking to take a bit of a breather, and it's like tired of jumping for more money to find that the company's really not that great and they weren't treated that well. And it was just a financial decision rather than more of a career decision. So, companies, the good companies are the ones that make it through and can make hay in a market like this, where they can attract good people and they can retain, most importantly, the people that they have and that they want. And I think a lot of companies would say that they've been on the hamster wheel at best over the last few years, which is, they hire 3, lose 2. So it's really hard. People talk about attraction all the time, but if you can't retain people, that's actually worse. So that's the metric that I like to follow, and I think that one is a measuring stick about your organization internally, how you treat people, your message, the opportunity for people to progress, all those things wrapped up come back to retention. So that's what
I will jump in on that though, because I feel retention is not retention, right? There is churn and there's regrettable churn. And to me, those are 2 different things.
Well, sure. I mean, I think a churn is not a bad thing. You need turnover in your organization. It happes. But you want to make sure you're retaining the people you want. That's
exactly it. So I think that's where it's not just about, are we meeting X% churn? No. It's about, are you meeting X% of regrettable churn, right?
Yeah.
Because
I would agree with that 100%.
Right, there is voluntary turnover.
There's
right. Well, and that's the thing. But again, it's like if you want to measure something like this, well, you got to have a process in place in having conversations with your managers, being like, well, which individuals would contribute to regrettable churn? How are we measuring this? How, as part of our performance reviews, can we have a check-in on who, if we, left that particular person, that like not just regrettable for me personally because I like them, but that would be a regrettable situation for the organization, which at that point also we should think about how can we build back up, right? Because if that person walks, everything falls apart. That's also not great. But so regrettable churn is something, again, that I also recommend my my clients to look at, but you got to plan for that and get the data built into your regular review process.
Awesome. So we're going to take some questions from the floor in just a couple minutes. But before we do, Annika and Alistair, your best piece of advice for HR professionals who are right now white knuckling it into 2023?
Well, my piece of advice would be, don't take your foot off the gas. From an HR perspective or hiring perspective, continue to be creative, because the world is more competitive than ever. You compete against people internationally now for talent. And so, so you've got to sharpen the sword and keep forging ahead to make yourself the most attractive organization out there, because this job crunch is not going away. I just don't see it. Like, there's just too much demand. The tech industry just moves too quickly. There's always something new coming out. There's not enough people getting into it. Technology is eating the world, and that's never going to change. So this is the world that we're going to live.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's like build and rebuild your processes. Rethinking, especially if, for example, if your recruitment, is going down and maybe not as heavy as it was, what can we rethink? How can we rebuild? How can we get ready for what is there to come? Again, if you have not thought about your compensation strategy, you better get this in place because it's not going to go away. So what are the processes we have? What's working? What's tricky? How can we optimize and professionalize those processes so that we're ready? So I think that's kind of something I really want to make sure is that folks continue to build the capacity around their processes, and it doesn't matter if you're small or big.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, we would be happy to take some questions from the floor. Anybody have any questions? And meanwhile, I'm just going to check the chat and see if we. It looks like we might have missed one. So now that some companies have started requiring and even posting that people come back into the office. Is this remote thing still as much of a thing? And I mean, what the person put here is our group still at a disadvantage for not offering remote options?
Well, I would say that like before the pandemic hit, I think it was like 20% of employees, 25% of, and we're talking tech here, worked remotely. Worked remotely. And then during the pandemic, it went up to 95%, and now it's dropped back down to 90%, which is a complete sea change. But of course, when we talk about remote, we're not talking about 5 days a week. We're talking about maybe it's 2 days a week, 1 day a week, 3 days a week, 2 days a month. Who knows? Like every company is different. But yeah, I mean, we have clients who have a 5 day a week in office policy, and they find it very hard to find people. It's as simple as that. There are very few people that feel that going to the office 5 days a week or even 4 days a week is of value. There's a lot of people that see value as these are individuals. Yeah, I'm okay with going in 1 or 2 days a week or twice a month or something like that. But I don't think if hardly anybody that we talk to says 5 days a week is a worthwhile exercise. So yeah,
and it's interesting because I've had some conversations this week with clients who are like looking, it's like, well, should we open that new office or not? Right? Like, are we all going to go back? Is it worth the investment? Right? Is this truly what we want? And I think one of the biggest things that I'm seeing where there is a bit of a disconnect is on the leadership level, right? And it's really hard to kind of make sure that your employees know what's going on if on the leadership level you can't get on the same page. So it's having those conversations around what is important for the business. Why is it important to be in office or not? Because as Candace said, there's clearly certain jobs. And what is it that the business needs to achieve? Right. So if we're all of a sudden looking to hire 10 highly specialized research lab people, right, that will do analysis on mining samples, right, is like, well, good luck finding them all in one location, right? So, but then again, it's like, well, if we need them to be in the lab, then they have to be in a lab, right? So it's kind of making sure that we know where we want to go and what's important there. And again, in that leadership kind of gets on the same page. And when that same page has been found, that then it's clear communication and it's kind of like, this is what it is. Because I think the limbo is what drives employees nuts, right? It's like, oh, well, now it's this, but maybe I have to come back, maybe not. And I just don't think that's fair. So leaders have to step up and make some decisions.
Right. I mean, a good example in tech, I mean, hardware, if you're working on hardware, you're probably going to be in the office because you're making things, you're actually designing things. Yeah. So we see that a lot with our tech companies, that the hardware groups are kind of in the office a lot more than let's say the software teams. So.
I do see a question in here coming back to flexibility with offering flexible stat holidays. How do companies implement this in accordance with provincial or their legislation? How do we keep in mind business requirements for business closures and safety reasons without having certain number of people in the physical building at one time on holidays where most people would normally be off? So I think in your question is your answer. So would be my would be my response. So, you know, and you need to pull together. What are the provincial requirements? What are the occupational health and safety considerations? What does the business require? And so on. So I think you've actually answered it. So it's a puzzle for sure. But it is possible. It absolutely is possible around the flexibility for stat holidays. I've had to manage that for sure, where there was requirements related to healthcare. So
and again, it's like, and
just,
maybe it's not all the way right away, right? So one client right now, they're like, this is where we want to get to. We love that. However, what we're doing right now is, rather than everybody picks and chooses, like, if you're having requirements for yourself that you feel you would like us to accommodate, let's talk about it, right? The door is open just to kind of see what even comes, right? And it's like what happens on that, rather than just making it super flexible. And yeah, obviously you have to be in alignment with all the requirements on the provincial and obviously also on the federal level. And again, it's like, I think the other thing too to consider, as much as I love all the flexibility, there is something to be said about days where everybody is off. Right? So that I don't feel like anxious because my Slack is not turning off, my emails are not turning off. So here is me celebrating my holiday, but yet I'm super anxious about, you know, all the stuff that is happening because all my other folks are in the office not celebrating that day because they are celebrating something else. So I think that goes back to what I said earlier, is like, you got to make sure there is coverage, right? Much like
there's coverage, but there's also an inclusion piece there, hey, because I mean, while you may extend flexibility to someone for their particular religious or cultural holiday, if they end up marginalized, because then we've actually created brand new problems. It's a great point.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
So
this is
it has
stuff.
You know, it has or I've also seen it's like where companies have chosen, almost pre-chosen, is like, here are kind of some of the things you can kind of you know, go between, and maybe it's, you know, we're only focusing on the flexibility around these winter holidays, right? So that's kind of where everything else is regular stat holidays. However, around the winter holidays, you know, going all the way into the new year, maybe there's something there. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Another question just popped in terms of vacation. What are the trends around vacation that's standard? So I mean, there's like required minimums, but like, what are you seeing in terms of the trends of minimums?
Really good question. So Alistair, you probably know more. I mean, I can
well, no, I mean,
it,
you know, we see unlimited vacation that people offer out, and that's definitely become a trend over the last, you know, couple of years. But sometimes people don't. They actually like to have a little bit more clarity on exactly what their vacation is, rather than it being in their hands. But I don't know. I mean, I think what we've seen is definitely with our US clients having to make sure that they follow the rules of, let's say, Canada, for example, and that they don't sort of say, well, you know, people, you know, working for us, these are the set of rules that we have for our company down in the US. So that's basically, I mean, they all get 2 weeks for sure, but maybe they get 3 weeks holiday. So, well, that's just not going to cut it up here. Like, you know, there's so many more options for everybody. You've got to be super competitive. So, you know, we kind of see 4 weeks as pretty standard as you move up the ranks for sure. And but you know, the unlimited piece, where it's more in the hands of the individual, and as long as you get the work done and you give us prior warning to when you're going to be away, we're seeing that area grow quite significantly too.
Yeah, two things that I just, you know, kind of building on what Alistair said is like for more experienced senior folks, it's like the 4 weeks minimum is kind of almost a given now. However, I would say it's like the 3 week, like hardly anybody does 2 weeks. There's no such thing in Canada, right? So I would say it's like, well, definitely like minimum is the 3. We're really moving towards 4 for more senior folks is standard. and pushing likely above that. So it's interesting. We've seen a bit of an uptick. I found in the last year, kind of that is like there was a little bit of like, why am I taking vacation during the pandemic? I can't do anything with it. And now it's like, I want to go travel. So, folks are like that's becoming more of a thing. So, and on the unlimited, it's like I've seen a bit of a shift there in the sense of like, yes, it's unlimited. However, there's a minimum requirement. Right, so it's unlimited, but we require everybody to take at least 3 weeks because
because people weren't taking it.
Exactly.
That was part of the problem.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's the expectation setting. And on top of that, I've also seen a lot of companies that are doing unlimited vacation because it's this issue of folks not potentially taking because the leader is not living it. There's all kinds of challenges. Is having these personal care days that the whole company takes, and that often, depending on if you have US and Canadian folks, is like sometimes it might be the Canadian long weekend that gets extended where the whole company is off. Sometimes it's the US where but everybody is off. So in addition, there is almost every month or every 2 months there is this extra care day, which really, if you have an unlimited vacation policy, it doesn't really matter, right? But this way you're kind of forcing that we're all off again. It's time for everybody to rest. It's not like it's a little different than the vacation, and it's really like that came out of the pandemic, and it seems to be sticking around. So that's kind of the again a little bit of a shift on that unlimited vacation.
Yeah, we are getting to the end of this hour, and it has flown by, which I totally I'm not surprised at all. We do have a couple of extra questions that are in the chat, and so if you were one of those ones that asked a question that didn't get answered, if you want to hang around, then please do, or if you want to hear the answer, then please do. But if you
feel
want
free to
on,
reach out on LinkedIn or whatever. I'm happy to answer it there if we don't get to it. So no problem.
Yeah, Annika, a pleasure and a privilege as always. You are you don't disappoint with your passion and your perspectives and expertise, and I do strongly encourage anyone who has compensation questions, is interested in a compensation health checkup, which I know Annika is super passionate about. You won't regret it, and we're just so grateful for your time. And Alistair, I've told you this to your face when the camera wasn't recording, but I always just appreciate your ability to sort of cut through things, and you've got a real knack for spotting where things are going and which things to pay attention to. And so I just love that you were willing to hop on and share some of those thoughts. So thank you everyone for coming as well.
Yeah,
yes,
hopefully everyone enjoyed it, and happy hunting, everybody.
Happy hunting, and of course I know if you're
happy hunting and happy retaining.
Yes, there you go.
And if you're interested in learning more about the amazing recruiting services from teamit.com, please reach out to Alistair as well.